Hmm. That's new. I don't know, Neil.
The notation at the top left says live on YouTube.
I don't think it's, yeah, I have a live on here also. I don't think it's live. It it needs to get us over to YouTube for this to actually start. Well,
So the little flag up at the top left is just a marker and not really a statement of actual fact.
we may be live. I'm not exactly sure, Neil. The only thing I can say right now is if I'll start the music. We're still recording locally, and I don't know the blips here. So we'll at least have a recording locally if there's something that doesn't record on YouTube.
Would you like me to?
Oh, here it is. Here it is.
All right.
It's just slow today for some reason. As soon as I get a pause, I can stop this and then we'll do the music and it'll start. Almost there, looks like. Um, Hello, everyone. Today is Saturday, July 18th, 2020. I'm Bob Diebold, Vice Chairman of the Committee for the Global Endeavor. Today, we continue with Phase 8 and the 40th webinar in our series of webinars on the topic comparing and contrasting the true teachings of Jesus with the traditional tenets and practices of organized institutional Christianity. This is topic 8 in the study guide called Revelation Revealed. Neil Waldrop is the author and also the chairman of the committee. I am turning the webinar over to Neil now. Neil.
Thank you, Bob. I am once again very pleased to be with you and with our other participants as we continue our series of intriguing broadcasts. We are indeed on the 40th webinar on this topic of comparing and contrasting the true teachings of Jesus with the traditional tenets and practices of organized institutional Christianity. Now, for any viewers who may not have been following our series, I recommend that you download the available documents that will allow you to follow us as we discuss, and they will help you understand what we are doing. Actually, the most important document that you really need is called Living the Real Religion of Jesus. And this is a supplement that I wrote in the summer of 2019 to the long document Revelation Revealed that I wrote in the summer of 2016. Now, both of these documents, Revelation Revealed and the supplement Living the Real Religion of Jesus, are available for download on the website of the Committee for the Global Endeavor. The citation is as follows: www.globalendeavor.net. I say again, www.globalendeavor.net. And in this citation, the word global endeavor is treated as if it were a single word with no space and no punctuation in the middle. The links to download these documents, Revelation Revealed, but probably more important for today, the supplement Living the Real Religion of Jesus, are about 2/3 of the way down that homepage that I gave you. Now, because you are not able to ask us questions as we go along, we offer you the option of sending us in a message whereby you would pose a question. And this would be via the email address identified at the bottom of the homepage, which is quite simple: info@globalendeavor.net. If we decide to use your question during a future broadcast, we reserve the right to edit the wording. And in that event, you would receive an answer from all of the people participating that day, not just from me personally. So now, having gone through all the mechanical aspects of this broadcast, I turn to the substance. On the webinar that we conducted last week, we had reached the bottom of page 15 of my document, Living the Real Religion of Jesus. In particular, we had started to consider a sentence on that page near the bottom, which reads as follows: after all, it is reasonable to infer that Christ Michael could have drawn on his personal knowledge of events that had occurred over extended periods on inhabited planets in either or both systems in distant constellations of his local universe of Nebadon, where other system sovereigns had rebelled. This now leads us into an examination of those circumstances, starting with the footnote on the same page, which is a substantive footnote, not just a procedural matter. So, as I did last week, I would ask one of our participants to read it for us. Stephen, would you be willing to do that, please? The footnote that begins with the words "in paper 53."
Yeah. In paper 53, The Lucifer Rebellion, the author states, in the universe of Nebadon, the domain of Christ Michael, there are 10,000 systems of inhabited worlds. In all the history of the Nanodeck sons, in all their work throughout these thousands of systems and at the universe headquarters, only 3 system sovereigns have ever been found in contempt of the government of the Creator Son. While there had been 2 previous rebellions in Nebadon, they were in distant constellations. The Son of Man was confident of success, and he knew that his triumph on your world would forever settle the status of his age-long enemies, not only in Satania, but also in the other two systems where sin had entered. And that's from paper 53, sections 0, 4, and 8.
Thank you. The underlying content of this rebellion by Lucifer seems to us a natural occurrence because we are embedded in it. But the information that the Melchizedek author has provided should allow us to overcome that belief. This is not natural at all. There are 10,000 systems and only 3 of them have ever been the location for a rebellion. We are in one of those 3. In a decimal sense, as I mentioned last week, that equates to 0.0003. Now, as in the case of the discussion at the very end last week, I have assembled passages concerning the Lonanandecs who serve as system sovereigns in order for us to have a clearer view of the nature of this rebellion and what it entailed and why Lucifer had the power that he did to create the huge disruption. So now, Bob, would you put that document on the screen? Starts from paper 45, the local system administration. Thank you. Can you somewhat reduce the enlargement so that we have a little bit more? That's good. Thank you. George, would you read the first 2 paragraphs there?
There we go. Am I on system sovereign? Is that where you?
Well, yes, underneath where it starts, the chief executive of.
Okay. All right. The chief executive of a local system of inhabited worlds is a primary Lonanandek son, the system sovereign. In our local universe, these sovereigns are entrusted with large executive responsibilities, unusual personal prerogatives. Not all universes, even in Orbantan, are so organized as to permit the system sovereigns to exercise such unusually wide powers of personal discretion in the direction of system affairs. But in all the history of Nebadon, these untrammeled executives have exhibited disloyalty only 3 times. The Lucifer rebellion in the system of Satania was the last and the most widespread of all. Okay, keep going.
Please.
In Satania, even after this disastrous upheaval, absolutely no changes have been made in the technique of system administration. The present system sovereign possesses all the power and exercises all the authority that were invested in his unworthy predecessor, except for certain matters now under the supervision of the Constellation Fathers, which the Ancients of Days have not yet fully restored to Lanaforge, the successor of Lucifer. Paper 45, section 2, paragraphs 1 and 2.
Thank you. We will go on to the next page, which is a selection from paper 35. Bob, will you read the first 2 paragraphs, starting with the system sovereigns and so on?
Sure. 9, the Lonanandek rulers. The system sovereigns are true to their names. They are well nigh sovereign in the local affairs of the inhabited worlds. They are almost paternal in their direction of the planetary princes, the material sons, and the ministering spirits. The personal grasp of the sovereign is all but complete. These rulers are not supervised by Trinity observers from the central universe. They are the executive division of the local universe And as custodians of the enforcement of legislative mandates, and as executives for the application of judicial verdicts, they present the one place in all universe administration where personal disloyalty to the will of the Michael Sun could most easily and readily entrench itself and seek to assert itself. Our local universe has been unfortunate in that over 700 sons of the Lananadek order have rebelled against the universe government, thus precipitating confusion in several systems and on numerous planets. Of this entire number of failures, only 3 were system sovereigns. Practically all of these sons belong to the second and third orders, planetary princes and tertiary Lananadeks.
Thank you. I will read the next 2 paragraphs, which continue on to page 3. The large number of these sons who have lapsed from integrity does not indicate any fault in creatorship. They could have been made divinely perfect, but they were so created that they might better understand and draw near to the evolutionary creatures dwelling on the worlds of time and space. Of all the local universes in Orvington, our universe has, with the exception of Henselon, lost the largest number of this order of sons. On Uversa, it is the consensus that we have had so much administrative trouble in Nebadon because our sons of the Lananadek order have been created with such a large degree of personal liberty in choosing and planning. I do not make this observation by way of criticism. The creator of our universe has full authority and power to do this. It is the contention of our high rulers that while such free-choosing sons make excessive trouble in the earlier stages, in the earlier ages of the universe, when things are fully sifted and finally settled, the gains of higher loyalty and fuller volitional service on the part of these thoroughly tested sons will far more than compensate for the confusion and tribulations of earlier times. Doreen, would you read the remaining 2 paragraphs, please? You have to unmute, please, Doreen.
Okay, I'm going to read from my book because I can't read. That's too small for me.
Okay.
So in the event of a rebellion on a system headquarters, a new sovereign is usually installed within a comparatively short time, but not so with the individual planets. They are the component units of the material creation, and creature free will is a factor in the final adjudication of all such problems. Successor planetary princes are designated for isolated worlds, planets whose princes of authority may have gone astray, but they do not assume active rulership of such worlds until the results of insurrection are partially overcome and removed by the remedial measures adopted by the Melchizedeks and other ministering personalities. Rebellion by a planetary prince instantly isolates his planet. The local spiritual circuits are immediately severed. Only a bestowal son can reestablish interplanetary lines of communication on such a spiritually isolated world. There exists a plan for saving these wayward and unwise sons, and many have availed themselves of this merciful provision, but never again may they function in these positions wherein they defaulted. After rehabilitation, they're assigned to custodial duties and to departments of physical administration.
Thank you, Bob. Now, if you could, please let us go back to the normal conversational mode for the webinar. It is a little bit difficult, but all of you have read this material before, and so I would like to ask certain questions and invite discussion. In the first of those 2 segments, the author, Melchizedek, states that in Satania, after this disastrous upheaval, absolutely no changes have been made in the technique of system administration. Why do you think that is the case? Why have no adjustments been made in the 200,000 years since Lucifer rebelled. Bob, what would you say about that?
Well, I think that what we're looking at is a tripartite system. You know, the discussion that the midwayers transformed from Jesus when he was at Symboyton, and he discussed this very thing about the tripartite system, which is legislative, executive, and judicial, as being spiritually oriented. So I think what we're looking at here, or what we're being described here, what we're gaining insight on, is the fact that the local universe government, and I suspect other types of governments, are in the same spiritual setup, or it's a spiritual setup with those three particular functions existing in the same way that they exist in the United States. So if we start to take a look at the way that this administration has to operate, the constellation level appears to be the legislative. They clearly tell us in these, at least in these paragraphs here, that the executive level happens at the system level. And operationally, you can see that each of the individual planets, operate with those provisions. The agents of days, appear to me to be the judicial, although I'm not exactly sure of that one. That's a little speculation on my part. Certainly, in some aspects, they are judicial, and that's the extermination of the personality. So I think that to answer the question, based on that context that I see, my speculation is that this function is going to occur. It's a universe type pattern by which government functions, and in fact, it's called government. Government and administration functions, and it's the levels of how things are, how individual personalities like the system sovereigns and planetary princes have different time frames by which they are either replaced or fully adjudicated. So based on that context, that's how I approach that question, Neil.
Thank you. George, I appreciate Bob's answer. I would like to move you perhaps toward a statistical basis for a reply of your own. We have a situation in which Christ Michael, the creator son of our local universe of Nebadon, created Lenondic sons for certain purposes, and it gave them certain character attributes and certain capabilities when they serve as system sovereigns. And in 10,000 cases, 9,997 of them are working very well. In 3 cases, there is an issue. So now, with that numerical basis in mind, I repeat the question I asked Bob: why have there been no changes since Lucifer rebelled?
Well, I don't know, first of all, but I assume it's because Michael wanted people in these, or sons in these positions, to have more freedom to be creative in their planning and choosing. He could have made them less creative. In fact, I think that's what one of the sentences. Most of our problems are due to the fact that people think in the rest of the super universe that maybe we gave our Lenondic sons a little bit too much freedom of choice, and that's what causes these problems. So I think that's about the best answer I can come up with to the question.
Thank you. To what degree would we say that this choice, a legitimate choice on Michael's part in designing the Leonardic sons and giving them authority as system sovereigns created the problem that he had to overcome now. He had a situation of rebellion. It was his choice, his decision to give wide levels of discretion, wide levels of creativity to the non-index sons. And now here he is, in effect, serving as a bestowal son on one of the planets affected by the rebellion. Thus, in a sense, he was obliged to help clean up the mess that one of his immediate sons, the non-index sons, had created. So would we be exaggerating to say that, in effect, Michael had brought this problem upon himself? Is that too severe a judgment, Stephen?
Well, I suppose if you want to be legalistic about it, yeah, but there is no progress without risk. I mean, and there's no freedom without risk. And as you mentioned, statistically, the consequences, well, statistically, the consequences have been minor, but you can't say that experientially they have been minor in those systems that went under rebellion. I mean, there's been, for instance, an incredible amount of suffering just on this planet because of our history in that sense. So you can't discount the experiential consequences, but there are two reasons why I think that it was allowed to continue as it was. First of all, Michael was under full authority, within his full authority, to do what he did, and to second guess him or correct him or imply that he made an incorrect judgment. Well, that's a pretty big deal since he's a creator son. So that would in itself create an awful lot of consequences that we can't foresee. I mean, if the judgment of a creator son is being questioned, who is it being questioned by? I mean, it'd have to be some kind of super universe tribunal to bring our creator son under some kind of investigation. That would be pretty radical, pretty destructive probably. Second of all, everybody seems pretty convinced that in the long run, things are going to work out for the best, even given the results of these rebellions. And, you could say the same thing about the Universal Father. He has granted us all freedom, and that freedom has led to an awful lot of terrible consequences throughout all the super universes. And if you wanted to question the granting of freedom based on some negative circumstances, you'd have to question the granting of any freedom to anybody, even by the Universal Father. So I think that would lead to an awful lot of doubt and disloyalty and confusion everywhere. So short of there being widespread chaos in our local universe, I think the costs of doubting the creator son and questioning creator son, those consequences would be worse than what we've already endured.
Thank you. I agree with you. And further, the consequences, even though they are appalling from our perspective, correspond to the reality of the freedom of choice, which you have talked about. And if the design of freedom of choice is to be meaningful, it must be possible to make wrong choices, as you stated in regard to human beings on our planet. And paraphrasing your remark about working out in the end, I repeat the sentence by the chief of archangels in the second excerpt of these two. It is the contention of our high rulers that while such free-choosing sons make excessive trouble in the earlier ages of the universe, when things are fully sifted and finally settled, the gains of higher loyalty and fuller volitional service on the part of these thoroughly tested sons will far more than compensate for the confusion and tribulations of earlier times. So Dory and I would like to go to the very last paragraph in the second of these two sections that we have read. This has to do with the chance to repent, the chance to be redeemed, and to continue in a different capability. The chief of archangels states, there exists a plan for saving these wayward and unwise sons, and many have availed themselves of this merciful position, but never again may they function in those positions wherein they defaulted. After rehabilitation, they are assigned to custodial duties and to departments of physical administration. So now I'm going to ask you to speculate. It has been 200,000 years approximately since Lucifer and his immediate subordinate Satan rebelled. And as of the time that the Revelators gave us the Urantia book, they had not repented. They had not availed themselves of this possibility of being forgiven, a plan for saving these wayward and unwise sons. If you have to make an appraisal of their future actions, do you think it is even remotely possible at this point, 200,000 years later, that Lucifer or Satan or both of them will in fact repent and will accept the idea of being remodeled into a much less responsible capacity?
Well, if I understand that they destroyed their personality, is that correct?
That's one of the conclusions that a particular author gives.
And then on the other hand,
Lucifer, excuse me, go ahead.
oh, I'm sorry.
It's all right.
I was going to say, and they don't have a thought adjuster. So, and that's another thing that's missing. So they're not self-reflective, and they haven't, acquired that insight and wisdom to recognize what kind of plan they put into place and the consequences of their actions would have had. So when you destroy that whole ability to really think, I think you mar your mind. Whatever is there, they are probably, I don't know, I would say corrupt. Their minds are corrupt, and I don't think there is an opportunity, unless I don't know what else works on that level. They would have to go back to the Melchizedek schools and get retrained. But no, I doubt if they will repent if they didn't so far. And they did not recognize the tragedy that they had, done to, the system. So no, I don't think that. And it's, it was funny because when you're reading, they take, a lot of the material beings, mortal beings that were here before with them to reconnect, with the lower orders of beings. So on the planet, and I thought, well, wait a minute, don't they have any discussions about this planet and how it operates? After all, they had the 100, what do they call it? The core of 100, right? When they came here.
Caligastia 100.
Yeah, the Caligastia 100, and that's, those were from this planet. But it seems there's no collaboration, and it's easy once, I could see it happening here, and that's where I could see that the insurrection and how people could get so influenced by people of higher orders, let's say, and you just deceived, and you deceive yourself, and it's very difficult if you have an ego, and I guess their sense of self. If he thought he was God, Lucifer, well, then what's redeemable about that son, that Melchizedek? So what is redeemable? I just can't identify with it. I don't understand it really, except that you fall, besides the narcissism and the rest of the stuff that's always talked about, it's so distorted that person, there's nothing. I believe there's nothing. When you believe you are everything that you think you are, and above that, God, you are God, I guess. I don't know what's rehabilitated, you know, the others, the lower orders, of course, you know, the second and third, the tertiary. So they get remedial, you know, rehabilitation there in the administrative duties. But other than that, I'm not sure. I don't think they would change their minds. I don't think. I think it's too distorted at this point.
I personally agree with you, and I would identify another factor, the idea that if they were to repent and be, in effect, allowed to continue, they would be given vastly subordinate types of duties to the ones that they had before. And I think that the issue of pride would be an extremely high level of challenge to them, that Lucifer, having rebelled against the authority of his creator father, Michael of Nebadon, would not accept an essentially custodial set of duties that would deprive him of any degree of authority, any degree of originality or creativity. I think it's very unlikely. Now, I offer to the rest of you the opportunity, if you wish, to contribute to this discussion of your perceptions of the likelihood that Lucifer and Satan would avail themselves of this opportunity to be forgiven. Stephen?
I just want to comment. I'm trying to visualize what the custodial duties would be on the capital of a super universe or a local universe. So there are no toilets, right? So nobody's using the toilet. The floors are probably not dirty. I can't imagine there being dirt in heaven, right? It can't be dirt in heaven, right? It's got to be clean. So what is it that they do? What kind of custodial duties do they do? I mean, do they pick up after the animals that are running around in their zoos? I mean, I'm just trying to figure that one out. So I could use some help there.
I appreciate your humor in asking these questions. I would interpret the phrase custodial duties perhaps to be the manager of some facility, some residential area, completely lacking in discretion and simply required to carry out routine functions of management. Bob?
You know, oddly enough, I had the same metaphorical thought as Steve had there. Steve, sorry, but I did come up, you know, the revelators use these terms specifically, you know, these are the English terms that we're going to have an immediate picture of, I think. And that's the same one that I had, actually. You know, Neil's elegant custodial term there probably makes much more sense than that first thought. I wanted to add something about the sentence that talks about the anu versa. Let me read it one more time here again, because it raised you know, an issue again for myself to think about just how were these Lenon index actually created. Would have to lead to some speculation, I think. It says, anu versa, it is the consensus that we have had so much administrative trouble in Nebadon because our sons on the Lenonidek order have been created with such a large degree of personal liberty in choosing and planning. It seems to me that the choosing and planning is not necessarily the creation of a will that is limited, as we've been told that human will is limited. You know, we can't make pencils fly, for example. But this choosing and planning does mean that there probably is some administrative or legislative, I should say, setup. Regulations are the things that I come up with, you know, laws, regulations, policies, and guidelines. And it seems to me that these Lenon index aren't cyborgs. You know, they're not created with a twist and you know, that they can't operate in certain ways or they can't think in certain ways. It seems to me that that it's mostly on an administrative or a legislative or a regulative aspect. And I speculate on that and just to toss it out for, you know, for some thought, if anybody wants to reflect upon that. The going back to this idea of a custodial, there's a lot less to do if it's a custodial job, as you brought up, Neil. But the ability to choose and plan is the free reigning, is the personal liberty, I think, that Jesus planned on, and somehow was able at the constellation level to get that enacted so that these Lenan Index can do things. You know, each of the orders has specific roles and responsibilities, so that has to be regulated in some way. Back over to you.
Thank you. I would simply take the opportunity to add to your remarks the observation that the prepositional phrase on Uversa takes the question to a higher level than the local universe. Uversa is the capital of the super universe. So the author of this paper is the chief of archangels of Nebadon, and the chief of archangels is reporting information that comes from the general trend of opinion at the super universe level. Obviously, at the super universe level, there are comments about different local universes. But in effect, the chief of archangels is giving an overall conclusion that comes from observers at the level of the super universe.
Yes, Neil, one quick thought about that. Yes, that's exactly right. And it doesn't seem like the chief of archangels is really saying that that's a negative. And in fact, he or she is just reporting that to say that, you know, they've come up with a causality on this, and oh, by the way, you know, it's going to work out okay because it's a real small problem, but it's going to the cost benefit is probably much higher on the benefit side.
Okay. Now, in some of our previous webinars, we have talked about the characteristics of an agendanter. And on an individual level, the possibility of being an agendanter ultimately occurs only for those human beings who are born and grow up in the context of a rebellion. So we at least put that on the positive side of the scale. But I have also assembled paragraphs about the situation of Urantia in Satania and the comparative number of planets that rebelled, whereas most of them did not. And this is in a separate document that I would now ask Bob to put up on the screen, please. Could you slightly diminish the size of that, please? Okay. George, could you read the first two paragraphs? Satania is not a uniform physical system and so on.
Sure. Satania is not a uniform physical system, a single astronomic unit or organization. Its 619 inhabited worlds are located in over 500 different physical systems. Only 5 have more than 2 inhabited planets, and of these, only 1 has 4 people planets, while there are 46 having 2 inhabited planets. Urantia is commonly referred to as 606 of Satania in Laurelaceae of Nebadon, meaning the 606th inhabited world in the local system of Satania, situated in the constellation of Laurelaceae, one of the 100 constellations of the local universe of Nebadon. Constellations being the primary divisions of a local universe, their rulers link the local systems of inhabited worlds to the central administration of the local universe on Salvington, and by reflectivity to the super administration of the Ancients of Days on Uversa.
Thank you. Bob, would you read the next 2 paragraphs? Lucifer was not an ascendant being, etc.
Sure, let me bring them up here a little bit. Lucifer was not an ascended being. He was a created son of the local universe, and of him it was said, quote, "You were perfect in all your ways from the day you were created till unrighteousness was found in you. Many times had he been in council with the Most Highs of Adentia, and Lucifer reigned upon the holy mountain of God, the administrative mount of Jerusalem, for he was the chief executive of a great system of 607 inhabited worlds. Did you want me to read the next one also?
Please.
The Lucifer rebellion was system-wide. 37 seceding planetary princes swung their world administration largely to the side of the arch rebel. The first one was from 53, section 1, paragraph 1, and the second one was from section 7, paragraph 1.
Both from paper 53, as you stated. The final paragraph is likewise from paper 53 and also from paper section 7 in it. I read it as follows. Thus were these arch rebels allowed to roam the entire system to seek further penetration for their doctrines of discontent and self-assertion. But in almost 200,000 Urantia years, they have been unable to deceive another world. No Satania worlds have been lost since the fall of the 37, not even those younger worlds peopled since that day of rebellion. Okay, you may now remove this document from the screen, please. So I think it is interesting to compare some of these numbers. The authors tell us that 37 planetary princes rebelled out of the 607 planets that were inhabited at the time. That is 6%. And now there are 619. It still amounts to about 6%. The numbers don't change too much when you change the denominator. So our planet is one of those 37. Now, one of the elements talks about 619 now, and we are 606. That at the time of the rebellion, there were only 607. So what that means is that in the 200,000 years since the time of the rebellion, 12 additional planets have been recognized as being inhabited by human beings in various forms. So this is an interesting point in terms of the sequence of events. In 200,000 years, 12 planets have been added as inhabited planets. Now I did the math on this. If we divide 200,000 years by 12, we get an average interval exceeding 16,000 years between the time for recognition of a new planet where there are intelligent human beings. This is intriguing, at least. I'm sure that figure of 16,000 and something is not very accurate, because first we start with the number 200,000 that is not very accurate either. It's an approximation. And further, one would think that the recognition of inhabited planets is not something that will happen at a uniform pace. In other words, there may be clumps of several planets that come in fairly rapid succession, and then an even longer interval before the next one comes. We don't know this, but I'm simply trying to point out that if we take the average, the idea that it takes approximately 16,000 years for a new planet to be ready to be accepted as the home of intelligent beings, an inhabited planet, this is quite intriguing. In effect, the life carriers are working on all sorts of planets in Satania, one would think. But nevertheless, to have a payoff of intelligent human beings, on the average, it takes them 16,000 years. Now, that's not really a fair statement either. They've been at it for a longer time, but only achieve that result on the average 16,000 years after the preceding one. George, does any of this make sense to you, or perhaps you would like to offer reflections on what's going on?
Well, that was quite a bit. But yeah, as for the 607 worlds, I've noticed that before. I just can never decide um, what time period that refers to. In other words, we've been an inhabited planet for, what is it, 1,000,000 years now. We were recognized as inhabited. So that reference to 607 is probably something like a million years ago.
The number 607 was the situation as of the time the rebellion occurred.
I understand. What I'm saying is we were recognized 1,000,000 years ago. And we were the 606th. Okay. So I've thought about it in those terms. Between 1,000,000 years ago and 100 years ago, we've gone from 606 to 619. So I use a different divisor.
Okay.
It's, 19, I'm sorry, 12 or 13 in 1,000,000 years instead of in 200,000.
Fine. But 606 versus 607 means that at the time of the rebellion, Urantia was the second youngest inhabited planet in Satania. Are you with me there?
No, like I said, 607, it doesn't say when he was called up before the Most Highs and lectured about his attitude. It doesn't say when that occurred. It says that he was called up multiple times. It could have been over a long period of time,
Well, you're going back into the previous history of the rule of Lucifer while he was serving as a system sovereign. My point had to do with the fact that as of the time he rebelled, there were 607. We were number 606. And so at the time he rebelled, we were the second youngest inhabited planet in terms of recognition as an inhabited planet.
Yeah, sure. You can interpret it that way. I don't, but that's fine.
Okay. Now I'd like to go to the thought about Michael choosing. We don't know anything about planet 607. We don't know, for example, whether 607 of Satania was the location of a planetary prince who joined in the rebellion. Only 37 out of 607 did. Our planetary prince did, Caligastia. But we don't know whether 607 was one of those 37 that rebelled. So I'm offering at least the possibility that of the 607 planets that existed then, Urantia was the planet that might have been the youngest of those that rebelled. Bob, does this make sense to you?
This is an interesting discussion. I want to just make a point here that when they talk about physical systems, they're talking about solar systems. They use the word systems. Revelators use the word systems multiple times. The system of Satania is a potential to have 1,000 inhabited planets, but the physical system of our solar system is what they're talking about here. And various systems there are a set of various percentages. I'm not sure that I could come up with the calculation that you and George are having a conversation with. Give me the exact question that you threw to me.
Okay. Let me start with perhaps a logical way of laying this out. We are 606 of Satania. At the time of the rebellion, there were a total of 607, whereas now there are 619. But at that time of the rebellion, 200,000 years ago, approximately, there was only one planet that was junior to us in terms of the time of being recognized. So we don't know whether 607 went into rebellion. We just don't. It's possible that it did. but only 337 out of 607 did. 606, our planet Urantia, did. So what I was saying is that it seems possible that Urantia was the most junior, the least experienced planet of the 37 that rebelled, although we do not know whether planet number 607 did. Does that make sense to you now?
Yeah, yes. Sorry,
Okay.
I missed that in the beginning, but yes, I say yes to that.
All right. So what I'm reaching for in this numerical analysis is the idea that Michael picked the hardest job he could imagine when he picked Urantia as the planet on which he would bestow himself. It was in a local system that had rebelled, whereas there were only 3 of them out of 10,000. It was one of the 37 planets out of 607 that had rebelled, that had joined in the rebellion. And it might have been the youngest planet in terms of civilization and society, where he would have a relatively more challenging human environment to live on during his bestowal. I don't know whether anyone would like to comment on that. I offer the option for anyone to make a comment on Michael's choice.
Well, let me just add another thought to this. There's in the history of the rebellion, there's an interesting statement about another planet called Panoptia. Let me just read that and then make my comment to it. It says that the Lucifer rebellion was system-wide. This may be a paragraph that we've read, I'm not exactly certain. 37 seceding planetary princes swung their world administration largely to the side of the arch rebel. Only on Panoptia did the planetary prince fail to carry his people with him. On this world, under the guidance of the Melchizedeks, the people rallied to the support of Michael. Eleonora, a young woman of that mortal realm, grasped the leadership of the human races, and not a single soul on that strife-torn world enlisted under the Lucifer banner. So there's a couple of things that could be speculated here. One is that Panoptia certainly was much further along because the humans understood that there was a quote unquote war in heaven. There was a spiritual war going on. That didn't occur on Urantia. So I would, if we're taking a look at what it would be the hardest planet to adjudicate these 3 systems, it seems reasonable that this would be the most difficult one to select. And thinking about how we've been explained through the revelation about not only Michael, but Jesus, it sure seems like he would pick the hardest.
Thank you. That's my instinct too. We are speculating, but these factors seem to lead in that direction. In terms of the practical circumstances and objective characteristics of Urantia as an inhabited planet, it may have been suitable for Michael also because many of its characteristics place it in the middle of the various different kinds of material characteristics. It's an experimental planet, a decimal planet. It is a 2-brained, a planet where the inhabitants are 2-brained rather than 3. It is an atmospheric type. And there are other characteristics of life on our planet that put it in the middle range, by and large, of the possibilities of human adaptation. If any of you wish to look at this in greater depth, there is a table on page 15 of the main document, Revelation Revealed, that goes through these shall we say, practical material factors. But I'm not sure that I would assign equal importance to the earlier points that Bob and I were talking about, namely, this was a challenging assignment, that Michael appears to have chosen the most challenging assignment for himself because of the circumstances of our planet. Now, in regard to the timing of his choice, the first reference to when he decided this appears to be in regard to Salonius' narrative of the default of Adam and Eve. at the very end of that, in paragraph 3 of section 5 of paper 76, there is a message ascribed to Michael, to Adam, and I will read it as follows. Quote, I have given consideration to the circumstances of your default. I have remembered the desire of your hearts ever to be loyal to my Father's will, and you will be called from the embrace of mortal slumber when I come to Urantia, if the subordinate sons of my realm do not send for you before that time. Well, this is an ambiguous, unquote. This is an ambiguous message, but at least it is reasonable to construe this as a decision on Michael's part at the time of Adam and Eve, 35,000 years ago approximately, to bestow himself on Urantia. Who would like to comment on that? I'm surprised no one wishes to jump at that possibility. We know for sure that Michael had made a decision to conduct his bestowal on Urantia before Melchizedek came to our planet. There is a statement in paper 93, section 1, paragraph 2, which is very brief. The 12 Melchizedek's receivers knew of Michael's impending bestowal on their planet, but they did not know how soon it would occur. So obviously, before Melchizedek came to Urantia as an emergency bestowal son, as an emergency son, the Melchizedeks were grappling with the knowledge that Michael was going to come as the bestowal son. So at a very bare minimum, Michael decided to bestow himself on Urantia at least 2,000 years before he came. I see Doreen nodding, and I see nobody requesting the floor.
Yep, because you said what I was going to say. I was going to say the Adam and Eve default. So how many other planets had an Adam and Eve default? It doesn't say, does it? I don't know.
No.
So then, of course, the double default on this planet, why wouldn't you choose the one that's been hit the hardest?
Okay, that's an interesting idea. And I believe there's quite a bit of merit to that question. In effect, now, I believe we've gone through these elements about the character and characteristics of the Nonadic sons, the characteristics of Satania and Urantia's position within it, that give a broader picture of Michael's circumstance in his bestowal on Urantia in the human form of Jesus of Nazareth, and the knowledge that he could have drawn on when he was speaking to the apostles. So I would now like to go back to that paragraph at the bottom of page 15 of the essay and read the sentence once again. After all, it is reasonable to infer that Christ Michael could have drawn on his personal knowledge of events that had occurred over extended periods on inhabited planets in either or both systems in distant constellations of his local universe of Nebadon, where other system sovereigns had rebelled. So the question for us to speculate about is whether this knowledge of his about events on other planets that may have been part of the earlier rebellions, might have contributed ideas that he, Jesus of Nazareth, the human bestowal of Christ Michael, drew upon when he commented to his apostles about reactions to his teachings and what they could expect. Will you speculate on that, Stephen?
Well, seeing that he's a local universe sovereign or a creator, he's got to think in system terms. I don't think he's got any alternative there. And whatever decisions he makes or whatever actions he takes in a local context, he has to be able to place them in universal context as well. So I don't think there's any question that everything he said and done had a dual purpose. And I guess it takes an incarnated creator son to pull that off, to work simultaneously on a planetary context and a local universe context at the same time. That's a pretty neat trick.
Thank you. In effect, his comments, especially those that we read at the bottom of page 14, but also the comments at the top of page 16 that we are going to read, to the apostles about what they could foresee, about the hesitations, about the relative unreceptivity to his teachings, have to do with his insight as a creator son. I agree with Stephen about that, but I think perhaps also he may have been able to draw on his memory of events on other planets, and perhaps on other planets of the 37, where there had been a bestowal son, not himself, but a Nirvanal son who had conducted a bestowal. George, does that make sense to you?
Yeah, there was actually in the book, shortly after his bestowal, he was wandering in the desert, and then he runs into Gabriel just by chance, and they have all kinds of discussions about things. Number one being that he's fulfilled the requirements for sovereignty, but then he also goes off later, and this is in what is it, paragraph? Let me bring up the reference. Paper 136, paragraph 3 is where he runs into Gabriel, who says, Emmanuel sends his regards. And the next section, he runs into, let's see, the section after that, he runs into the Most High of Edentia. So, and he had a long conversation with him and Gabriel about the welfare of the universe. So there certainly was plenty of opportunity during this long converse for him to either refresh his memory or obtain the knowledge or whatever,
I'm going to go to.
relative to the point that you were making.
Thank you. I think that we are speculating, but I think also that the point that Stephen made is very important. He was a paradise creator son. He was able to draw on various kinds of knowledge. George has just pointed out that he had been conversing with Gabriel and the Most Highs and so on. So I think that the remarks that he makes to his apostles during this first discourse on religion have to include insights that he had as the creator son, not simply knowledge of his human mind in the personal character of Jesus of Nebadon. In his personal character of Jesus of Nazareth, the incarnated bestowal of Michael of Nebadon. All right, we have had a very thorough discussion of this question. I would now like to turn the page in the essay, Living the Real Religion of Jesus, to the top of page 16. There are 2 paragraphs there taken from section 5 of paper 155, a continuation of Jesus's remarks to his apostles. And I would ask, let's see, who hasn't had much of a chance. Stephen, you've read before, but I'm going to ask you to read these if you don't mind. And for a long time.
Both paragraphs.
Please.
And for a long time, there will live on earth those timid, fearful, and hesitant individuals who will prefer thus to secure their religious consolations, even though, in so casting their lot with the religions of authority, they compromise the sovereignty of personality, debase the dignity of self-respect, and utterly surrender the right to participate in that most thrilling and inspiring of all possible human experiences, the personal quest for truth, the exhilaration of facing the perils of intellectual discovery, the determination to explore the realities of personal religious experience, the supreme satisfaction of experiencing the personal triumph of the actual realization of the victory of spiritual faith over intellectual doubt, as it is honestly won in the supreme adventure of all human existence, man seeking God for himself and as himself and finding him. The religion of the spirit means effort, struggle, conflict, faith, determination, love, loyalty, and progress. The religion of the mind, the theology of authority, requires little or none of these exertions from its formal believers. Tradition is a safe refuge and an easy path for those fearful and half-hearted souls who instinctively shun the spirit struggles and mental uncertainties associated with those faith voyages of daring adventure out upon the high seas of unexplored truth in search for the farther shores of spiritual realities as they may be discovered by the progressive human mind and experienced by the evolving human soul. Paper 155, section 5, paragraphs 10 and 11.
Thank you. Before we discuss this wording in detail, I think it is useful to draw on comments from the preceding webinar, in effect, in which Stephen pointed out that this wording that is in front of us is not necessarily verbatim. First, I agree with that. And we should understand that Jesus could not possibly have said these words to the apostles because he did not speak English. The English language did not exist at the time. The English language as we have it now can probably be dated to about the year 1500. Material written in English that is earlier than that is practically unintelligible. No, Jesus was speaking most likely Aramaic, a language of the Semitic language family. It is not the same language as Arabic, but it is part of the same language family. And so even before we get into the question of selection and summation and paraphrasing and so on, we have the question of a translation. Jesus was not speaking English. So the Midwear Commission had to translate before they could even summarize and rearrange. Then I tend to agree with Stephen's remarks last week that they were arranging this, they were massaging it, they were summarizing. And so we should not take these words as a literal and verbatim excerpt from Jesus. They do not correspond to the traditional belief whereby words printed in red in the New Testament are exactly what Jesus said. This is not the case here. We do not have that. We do have, in effect, an effort, a sincere effort by the Midwear Commission to portray the essence and the ideas that Jesus expressed to his apostles. So having said all of that, I'm interested basically in the comparison between the tone of these two paragraphs. The first paragraph starts off with remarks that are rather negative. The second paragraph is predominantly positive. But let me ask about the portion of the first paragraph that is very negative in terms of its tone. In casting their lot with the religions of authority, they compromise the sovereignty of personality, debase the dignity of self-respect, and utterly surrender the right to participate in that most thrilling and inspiring of all possible human experiences. Why are these words so emphatic, so strenuous, so negative, George?
Not sure. They're trying to make a point, obviously. Why such, might even call it dramatic language. I don't really have a good answer. It just seems they're trying to get the point across emphatically that, this socialized religion or religions of the mind really are a compromise of spiritual freedom. So they use all of these different ways of expressing essentially that you compromise your spiritual freedom, and when you settle for a religion of the mind.
Thank you. Doreen, in our previous webinar, Stephen made the perfectly sensible point that we are given this material for our own understanding, just as Jesus was speaking to the apostles for their understanding. And so I wonder whether, by implication, this means that we should not approach some other human being who has accepted a religion of authority and tell him or her that he or she is compromising the sovereignty of personality, debasing the dignity of self-respect, and surrendering the right to participate in the most thrilling and inspiring of all possible human experiences. Doreen, that was a question. Should we say this kind of thing?
Question. Okay, I think they really summed it up very well, because there is nothing like it. And I wrote something as I was reading that, and I was just inspired to write something that came from my own heart and how I felt about it. And the idea is, you know, that we have such a need for something, you know, there's a yearning within us because the thought adjuster, I guess God arranged it that way, you know, to realize we need to connect because there is, you know, that perfect plan for our lives. And if we do nothing to fulfill it, then we're not going to find out what it is. So creating, you know, that new reality, my soul inside of me, the comforter, the refuge, the insight to see with new reality. Okay, so the driving force to live a love I have never known previously. This is how I felt about what they wrote. My constant companion, a spiritual force to push me beyond my fears, never to be alone, revealing beauty all around me, truth that I have a purpose, an eternal future, a potential to overcome my inadequacies and the inadequacies of the society I live in. It allows me to help and allows me to help inspire other people as well. Let me see where I lost my place. I'm sorry. Okay, to help inspire us to find the perfect gift that God has given us, a part of himself. How can anyone or any institution ever measure up to that? The functions that are materially spectacular, but many wanting in spiritual guidance. And there can be no transformation if we don't self-reflect, acknowledge our flaws, and desire to grow beyond what we are, whether it's kicking or screaming, perhaps until we could see the light with harmony and inner peace. And to get there, you have to see God by faith means to acquire the spiritual insight. It enhances the just guidance and augments God consciousness. And when I was thinking about why, and I was reading also about some articles, and was saying that people go to the institutions because many of them really have a need and are just so in trouble and disillusioned by life, and whether they're drug addicted or all kinds of problems. And the fact that the institutions, they tell them, well, say a novena or say a prayer or you will be saved or forgiven or whatever it is. But the sad thing is they don't give them what they really need. And that is to help them and support them and not just, okay, next, you know, like a business. And it was so sad because people really stopped going because they couldn't get the help they needed. So yes, again, I'm always talking about personal. So for me, the fact that having this thought adjustment, the Spirit of God within me, to take me on this journey, to know exactly how I should live my life and my destiny, what could be better than that? Nothing could interfere. And so the fact with your question, what you wrote, is that what has happened here? They're all confused. You have all these things going on, right? In order to get your self-respect or dignity, all the things that they talk about here, it is only through God that you can get it. You can't get it through any intermediary or anyone else. So, and that was kind of my point I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you for your inspiring reactions to the net message, the challenge that Jesus is portraying, and how it affects you and why you think it is of great value to any human being who is able to accept that challenge and act on it. The other issue that I was posing has to do with the level of tact in human relations. And now I will turn to Bob when I paraphrase this question. Supposing you are talking with some believer who has affiliated himself or herself with an organized institution or religion, perhaps one that is rather demanding in terms of its requirements. As a matter of tact, are you likely to tell the person that he or she has compromised the sovereignty of personality?
So I have two things that I want to respond. I'll respond to your question first, but I want to go back to your thought about tonality that you asked about those paragraphs, because I think that's fairly important here. So your question is, would I tell people any of this stuff? No, of course not. I've really imbibed in how Jesus spent his time in Rome, and he tried to crowd out error with truth. That's really the only way I would ever approach anything in the future, and hopefully I've been doing that for some time. I see that. So let me go to the tonality of these 4 paragraphs, actually, 10, 11, 12, and 13, because 12 and 13 are quoted. 10 and 11 are the midwayers translation, I should say, of what Jesus said at the time. So it appears to me that based on our last conversation, our last segment here in this webinar, conversation about Jesus having, or Jesus thinking back as his divine mind would actually allow him to think about these other parts of his local universe, and what impact would he have with these particular words that would then resonate to the other 70% of those to be inhabited planets. All we have right now, or as of this revelation, there's 30% of the planets are at some level of being inhabited by humans. So not only is he,
excuse me, you're speaking of in the local universe of Nebada.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. 3 to 10 million. So here we have, I'm trying to set the context from our last segment here, and it was an insight that I got out of this as where you were driving the group here, I think, for us to think that, we're not only talking about Jesus's job here, his mission here on Urantia. Steve brought this up, that, it would take a creator son to be able to take the hardest planet to be able to handle not only a spiritual default, but a rebellion, a spiritual rebellion, and to handle those other 37 plus the to be inhabited planets, as this will become this world of the cross, quote unquote, will become a legendary topic that I'm sure future planetary princes will be able to embed in their education of future humans. So the tonality is different, and this first paragraph to me seems like either the midwayers probably more the Melchizedek editor, was writing this for even future planetary princes, telling them, look, if from this rebellion and from this that actually caused an Adam and Eve to default for a long time, these things are going to happen to the humans. And I can't imagine, how and why he would have to say something like that in that particular tone to the apostles. And I'm sure that he softened that to some degree to be able to get across the idea that there's some pretty long-term psychological, spiritual, religious things that are going to happen to the humans before the actual realization of their victory over spiritual faith, spiritual faith over intellectual doubt. So that particular paragraph, I can imagine why now, I should say, after these conversations here today, I can imagine why the midwayers, under the guidance of the Melchizedek editor, would paraphrase that in modern discussion. And then it gets very poetic in the next paragraph. But the actual sum and substance of what Jesus said is then quoted in the next two paragraphs, and you find a major change in substance from these two paragraphs to the next two paragraphs. So I answered your first question and said no, I would never, or I certainly hope I would never, certainly not absolute in anything that I do, but would not want to approach someone to say that these are the things that are going to happen. This is a much higher level discussion, and the truth has to be figured out. And I think that's the insight that I got out of this discussion here today, to be honest with you. Back over to you.
Thank you. I will draw on previous personal discussions with you. I think at some point you may have said to me that when you first encountered the Urantia book, the fifth epical revelation, you succumbed to the temptation to criticize the atonement doctrine when you were perhaps conversing with particular Christian believers, but soon discovered that that was not necessarily the most tactful approach to adopt. Am I remembering this accurately?
Spot on. Absolutely right. You don't attack a belief. You find better ways to be able to provide the truth, and having the synthesis of the entire revelation should afford us some ways to be able to approach that with a much more positive, crowding out type, truth-driven effectiveness to be efficacious, I suppose.
Thank you, George. In effect, I'm suggesting, and I think Bob has just agreed, that these analytical remarks ascribed to Jesus are for our understanding, and they are not necessarily ideas that we should retail to other human beings, especially if we wish to be persuasive and tactful. Do you agree there?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, quite a bit in the book is for readers of the book and not for direct consumption by other people. I mean, it's intended that way.
Right. I think you have expressed the same idea that I was trying to convey, that we need to know these facts, but we do not need to throw them at someone else who may have a different view. And in fact, we shouldn't. It would be a failure of tact and human relations. Stephen, this is so close to a remark that you made last week that I'm assuming that you agree with the concept of tactful and polite presentation of views to others.
Oh, I'm prepared to go way beyond that. I find these two paragraphs actually quite disturbing. I will give the midwayer responsible for this text a little bit of leeway in composition, what he may be doing. Back in the time of Jesus, there were a lot of these rhetorical modes of expression. that were exaggerated. They were called hyperbolic arguments. And so, for instance, in the New Testament, Jesus says, I bring not peace, but a sword. He's not literally saying he's bringing a sword, but he's saying that in order to say, I've come here and you've got to, make a decision one way or the other. I'm not making things ambiguous for you. And so there's a rhetorical ways of expressing things. So I'm going to give the midwayer a little bit of leeway and say he took some of that hyperbole and created this text in more modern ideas. But I find the same weakness of, this is a caricature, and I don't find this to be a helpful caricature between religions of authority and religions of the spirit. I find this to be a harmful way of looking at things. People could look at Urantia book readers and how we approach the Urantia book and consider the Urantia book readership a theology of authority, because we give the Urantia book an awful lot of authority, just as much as many Christians give the Bible, and just as much as many Christians give the church. So the idea that certain religionists have a religion of the spirit and certain religionists have a religion of authority, it's not that simple. And to make it that simple, I don't think it's doing anybody any favors. Every individual has a certain amount of appreciation for authority and external authority, just like Urantia book readers do. And every religionist has a certain amount of appreciation for inner leadership and inner guidance. It doesn't matter whether you belong to a church or not. That is going to be a spectrum, and that spectrum is present for churchgoers and for non-churchgoers, for Urantia book readers and not Urantia book readers. And this whole dichotomy of religion of the spirit and religion of authority stems from this book that is more or less the godfather of this discourse on religion. It was written by Auguste Sabatier, who was an inspiration for the direct source for paper 155 that Matthew Block has identified. And that person is Reverend Ernest Tittle, who talks about Sabatier as his inspiration. And this whole idea of there being two kinds of religion, one based on authority and one based on inner guidance by the Spirit, is a late 19th century Protestant way of attacking Catholicism. And in fact, in the text that this paper is based on from Reverend Tittle, he directly attacks Catholicism, which has been removed from this text. We're preserving some of the other ideas, but reference to Catholicism is removed. So I agree with Bob that the next two paragraphs are very, very different in tone and intent, where he's talking directly to the apostles and he's giving them, direct inspiration and guidance and wisdom. And the purpose of these two paragraphs, I don't really get it. If we're not able to talk about this to other people, why is it here? And what good does it do us? What good do these paragraphs do us except to make us feel superior that we have a religion of the spirit and other people don't? I don't get it.
Well, thank you. Once again, you have exemplified the fact that we have a spirit of pluralism and diversity, and I cherish that. I treasure your remarks. I would give my own answer and say that, in effect, these two paragraphs correspond to the challenge that Emmanuel posed to Michael in his instructions before Michael left Salvington, that he was given leeway to advance the spiritual understanding of the planet as part of his mission as a bestowal son. And I would say that these paragraphs relate to that challenge, that Jesus' message, the incarnated personality representing Christ Michael, had the mission of a bestowal son of moving humanity forward toward more advanced levels of religious observance and belief, and that these paragraphs correspond to that challenge. I think we've had a good discussion of the overall tone of this paragraph and the particular phrases that I highlighted. I would now propose to go to formal question P, which is in the box underneath the quotations that we have been discussing. Formal question P reads as follows. It is now luminously clear that the 2,000 years that have elapsed since Jesus lived on Urantia are a much shorter interval than the quote, long time, unquote, that he mentioned in the first sentence of the excerpt. In your opinion, how much longer will it take for the behavior that he described to diminish substantially and then eventually die out? If you wish to associate your answer with different proportions of human beings living on Urantia in a range of future eras, please feel free to do that. George, would you take a crack at that?
Sure. I mean, how long it's going to take depends, I mean, on what the current spiritual state of the world is. I mean, if we want to get to the goal of the world preferring the religion of Jesus, where are we right now? Revelatories give us some assessments of where they thought we were in the 1930s. First, the Midwayers tell us that, quote, the worst of the materialistic age is over, end quote. So things are moving in a good direction. Second, a brilliant evening star tells us that, quote, one half the world is grasping eagerly for the light of truth. And third, the Midwayers tell us Urantia is now quivering on the very brink of an epoch of spiritual enlightenment. So in the 1930s, the world is moving away from materialism, eagerly grasping for the light of truth, and on the very brink of a spiritual age. So it was ready for a new revelation. And it's a fact that the Urantia book is an epical revelation. And Melchizedek tells us that divine revelations, quote, portray teachings which are not too far removed from the thought and reactions of the age in which they are presented, end quote. So the book's teachings are meant for this age. It was not written for an age 5 or 25 centuries from now, when thought and reactions of mankind will be significantly different. And it's also a fact that the concept of the religion of Jesus, as opposed to the religion about Jesus, comes from the Urantia book. This is the central teaching in the book, which was written for this age. So these assessments and facts show that the world was ready for the book in 1955. So why hasn't it responded more positively to it? I mean, clearly there's some obstruction in the way. And there are many possibilities, many of which we've discussed. But I remember something from the publication mandate, which identifies what it considers the primary obstacle. It says, quote, the book belongs to the era immediately following the conclusion of the present ideological struggle. That will be the day when men will be willing to seek truth and righteousness, end quote. So the era of the book is the day of the religion of Jesus. This era and this day will immediately follow the conclusion of the present ideological struggle. I'm pretty sure what that means is what a Melchizedek describes. He says the nature of the struggle, I should say, the nature of the struggle identified by Melchizedek is stated in paper 100. The world is filled with lost souls, not lost in the theologic sense, but lost in the directional meaning, wandering about in confusion among the isms and cults of a frustrated philosophic era, end quote. So many souls are looking for God, they're just confused about where to find him. So from these assessments and facts, it's reasonable to conclude that the primary obstacle is philosophic confusion, not a lack of spiritual interest. In paper 99, there's a sentence that's relevant. The religious turmoil of the 20th century does not, in and of itself, betoken spiritual decadence, end quote. So the era of the book will arrive once this confusion is resolved. How long it takes to reach this resolution depends upon how long it takes us to meet the religious challenge of this age, which is, quote, to construct the new and appealing philosophy of living, end quote. Back to you, Neil.
Thank you, George. Bob, I would like to tie this question P, partly to the discussion we had last week about the issue of active versus passive, the issue of positive versus negative. In effect, Jesus' statement, and for a long time there will live on earth those timid, fearful, and hesitant individuals, and so on, has to do with the question of the amount of activity and energy that human beings are willing to devote to the search for God. So in predicting how long this will be, are we partly estimating the degree of energy and activity that human beings are willing to devote to the search?
Last week I would have said yes. I think based on this set of conversations, I would have to say qualifiedly no, not emphatically or absolutely no. And the reason I'm saying that is that something that George just said talked about directionization by the Melchizedek. Last week we spent a little bit of time on discussing the ambiguities, I should say, or maybe even the conundrum between the religion of the mind and the religion of the spirit. And we did talk about active and passive, of course, and that that everything that's in the Revelation here talks about. Jesus even tells the apostles, we are about to, embark on and cause a problem with this, with the implanted religions of authority. And we're going to come in conflict with them. In fact, they came in so much conflict with, the primary religion that we had the crucifixion, of course. It was just something that had to go away. So yes, the religion of the spirit is going to require a wholesale change in this directionization of the individual. Steve brought up a very interesting point a minute ago, and Steve, I'm going to be reflecting. I'll play the video back to see what you said, because I think you make an important point here. I did have some time that I looked up Auguste Sabatier, and you have the book. I went out to Google Books to go read it, and he made an interesting statement that I was trying to find. Outside of tradition, there is only uncertainty and confusion. Last week, in the same topic, Neil, of the kind of question about active and passive, I think it was George, I think you had said that it's this conflict between how we're wired. I'm paraphrasing. You can certainly come back and say that this is not what you said. The humans, they're in conflict with their inner spiritual experiences that are in conflict with this constraint, being secularism, materialism, living with the religions of authority in the passive sense. So I think that what the Sabatier said is that, you know, if I'm in a tradition and I get out of it, I've got nothing but uncertainty and confusion. And that's something that requires some energy, not only intellectual, but spiritual energy, and maybe even material energy to be able to live with that and to figure out what that directionization needs to be. So let me make one other final statement here with this, and that is there's a statement that the archangel makes, that she says that the religion of the spirit requires only uniformity of insight, not uniformity of viewpoint and outlook. Uniformity of viewpoint and outlook is the tradition that I think Sabatier brought up, and that the Revelation talks a lot about. But this uniformity of insight puzzled me for a little while, and it still does puzzle me. There's some very interesting statements about how we might synthesize what the Revelation means about uniformity of insight. And it goes into this active stage that you were asking, Neil. In paper 12, section 5, paragraph 10, unspiritual animals know only the past and live in the present. Spirit indwelt man has the powers of prevision, insight. He may visualize the future. Only forward-looking and progressive attitudes are personally real. Static ethics and traditional morality are just slightly super animal. So maybe static ethics and traditional morality let us use our top two adjutants, but we're certainly not using the powers of spiritual insight, which would be uniform, which is the same direction. It's a directionization. The other's idea of this is that, you know, if we take a look at the statement about, you know, how a human has prevision, that's what insight really is. It's the ability to forward look and to be able to project the future. And I think that requires an awful lot more activeness, intellectual and spiritual activeness, to be able to come to grips with it. And I think that this particular idea ties last webinar with this one right now in certain ways that I hadn't thought about before until we asked the question. So I know I went a little bit further than the question, Neil, about active and passive, but those thoughts all came together at the same time here. Back over to you.
Please let me assure you that when I ask a question, I expect you and others to go beyond the ideas and to throw in insights of your own. That's the nature of our discussion. So you did not in any sense disappoint me. To the contrary, you were very emphatic and interesting in your remarks. Now, before I turn back to Stephen, I am going to turn back to you, Stephen. Yes, you're next. I would like to comment a little bit on part of your remarks about a particular author of a human work that Bob also referred to. Excuse me. This connects with statements that the revelators make, that they were instructed to draw as much as they could on previous expressions of human thought, because expressions of human thought were more likely to be persuasive and appealing to other human beings who would read the material. And the fact that they may have drawn upon this work of Sabatier does not mean that it is less a statement of the intent that Jesus expressed in this paragraph that they have written. It was up to them, the Midwear Commission, to express the point as best they could. And so your earlier comments that you disagreed with the way they did this are fair comments, in the sense that your editing preferences would have been otherwise. But in effect, they did the job the best they could under the circumstances for the purposes of encouraging the advance of spiritual perception on our planet. Now, having given you perhaps another few targets to shoot at, I turn to you and offer you a chance either to respond to what I just said or perhaps respond to the question.
Yeah, thank you. A couple things, Bob, about the idea of spiritual insight. Sabatier is very clear on that. He regards insight as immediate apprehension of spiritual truth. Now, that's what he means by insight. I think that's what the relators mean by insight. I have certain problems with that idea, but that's what insight means, immediate apprehension of truth or spiritual reality. Neil, by the way, this book is the best history of the religion of authority and its development in Christianity of any book I've ever seen. You would be this guy is really a smart guy, Sabatier. It's a very, very thorough history of the development of the religions of authority in Catholicism and in Protestantism, and then compares the two. So I was amazed by how much this guy knows and how well he writes. Anyway, just to let you know, you can get a reprint really cheaply, like for $5 of this book, and you probably would appreciate it. But I agree that the relatives had to take what they were given and do the best they could. One problem I have with Sabatier and with and Tittle, who are the direct author source of paper 155, is their dichotomy. They lived in a world where there was Catholic and there was Protestant, and there was inner access to truth through the Spirit, and there was external access to truth through authority. And that was the paradigm in which they lived and moved and breathed. And that is, unfortunately for me, conducted directly. That dichotomy in these two paragraphs is very, very clear that it's a black and white kind of thing. And it's really a good and bad kind of thing. And that's what I object to, is this dichotomous way of categorizing people's religious orientation. And I don't think it's as simple as that. So that's the problem. That's the real problem I have with these two paragraphs anyway. And I'll just place it at the foot of the secondary midwayer and his composition of his sources.
Well, we are told that the secondary midwayers are a bit closer to human beings than the primary midwayers, but they are considerably closer than angels. There is a group of secondary midwayers that are called fourth creatures, who have sometimes the ability to influence matter under instruction. So when you say that you're placing it at the foot of the secondary midwayer, he's not standing here in front of us. I assume that you mean that in an analogic or theoretical sense.
Metaphorical.
Metaphorical. Bob mentioned earlier that there is also the discretion of the Melchizedek revelatory director, and that's an important point too. I wonder whether you want to talk about the timeline. I remember a previous webinar in which you said you do not like questions about the future because you basically do not know, and of course none of us do, but you do not want to express any inclination about the timeline.
No, because we don't even know what we're measuring. We're measuring something that's completely qualitative and completely individual. And you're asking for a quantitative measure of something that can't be quantitatively evaluated. So it just doesn't make any sense to me.
Thank you. I will settle for that. You're not putting that at my feet at the moment. Doreen, would you like to give your impression of the tendencies of human development in the direction of individual spirituality, personal religion, and so on, in the spirit of the question that's on the page?
Sure. Thank you. Just read you paper 34, paragraph 6, 7. Those who have received and recognized the indwelling of God have been born of the Spirit. So you are the temple of God, and the Spirit of God dwells in you. But it is not enough that the Spirit be poured out upon you. The divine Spirit must dominate and control every phase of human experience. And that really stood out to me. And I read it a couple of times and I thought, wow, every phase of human experience. So while you think, you have all this latitude, all this free will, you do have it, but it's still limited to some things because that spirit that's in you is really guiding you through your life, whether you know it or not, through the ups and downs, till it brings you to the place where you have to be, hopefully. Nevertheless, there were several things I wanted to tell you, and that was, I was reading about a poll by Pew poll, and it said about churches and religion. It was talking about also the future, and I'll tell you about that after. It said religious kids are less juvenile delinquent, less drugs and smoking, better school attendance and graduation. Adults, they commit fewer crimes, give more to charity, lower unemployment, they're happier and they live longer. This was their poll. But another thing it said about Christianity, and it said by 2050, Christianity will remain the world's largest religion with 3 billion people. But right now in Montreal, they said the churches are now libraries, sports clubs, museums, and rented out to other religions. So, and the American church is only about 60% female, is about 60%. There are, and it's talking about obsessions and everything. But the idea is to look into the future. I find it interesting. And this was, I don't know how they figured out their poll. Maybe they went to Georgia or Alabama or something. There's a lot of Christians and based it on that. But Europeans are not reproducing. And of course, they're not talking only about Christianity, but there will be other religions that will be competitive with it until I don't know what's going to happen. And I always think, if you don't have the adversity, you don't have the suffering, people are not searching for something meaningful. They're happy, they're contented, or they're taking drugs or whatever it is, because all the materialism is abundant and it's got to stop at some point, and it'll be done gradually. There's got to be a crisis, and I think we are going through the crises somewhat now, and I don't know where it's going to end up. But when you look out and you see what's going on in society, and not only here in Europe, it's absolutely the anti-Semitism, the fascism, it's got crazy, out of control, and it's not going away. So I was going to say, and here, where's the bastion that you go to? People need the churches, they do need it. It's not the way they are now, but I believe they have to change. And there is plenty of reason, because what do you get in the institutions? They promote potentials of family life, which is disappearing. Okay, unselfish service, which we talk about, spiritual guidance. They furnish group worship. It was saying, a lot of good things. They encourage friendship, neighborhood welfare, moral values, and of course, eternal salvation. So if people are so unhappy and the things are falling apart in their life, they need other people. And where do you find other people is in the institutions. It's not where the priest is going to come to your house now and sit down and teach the family religion. I doubt it, unless maybe virtual. I'm not sure. But there is no doubt if it says your sonship is grounded in faith and you're to remain unmoved by fear. Well, fear is a great thing that's happening now, a lot of fear. And it says your joy is born of trust in the divine, and you shall not therefore be led to doubt the reality of the Father's love and mercy. It's the very goodness of God that leads men into true and genuine repentance. So your secret of the mastery of self is bound up with your faith in the indwelling spirit, which ever works by love. And even this saving faith you have, not of yourself, It is also the gift of God. And if you are the children of this living faith, you are no longer the bond slaves of self, but rather the triumph masters of yourself, the liberated sons of God. So, I have so much hope, but the only thing, your question, whether it was the timeline that you read, I think it's going to be a long time. I just could see that they're so adverse to being institutionalized in any way, especially the secularism, because there is so much, secularism now. And it's not that they're throwing God out, they're just throwing everything out. They're not interested. How do you bring people back? So I think the revelation is wonderful and how it's spreading, and it's going to be a long time until it spreads everywhere. Because even the Chinese, they mentioned the Chinese especially, but they're getting the revelation now. I think they mentioned so many countries that the revelation is coming to. And however it filters through word of mouth. And when you said about talking about how could you quote things in the book to people? If you're not sincere and talk from your heart to try to reach people and find out where they are at, you can't quote these things that you just, had in the previous 2 paragraphs. That's absurd. I mean, if somebody did that to me, I run the other way. Why would quoting anything like that attract anyone? It's you, the person, that will attract people because of how you are, the love that comes from you, the openness. There's something there. And I was talking to another Urantia reader, and he was saying the same thing. And oddly enough, before I stopped talking, I don't know if you know Steve Finney. I know George and Stephen does, but I don't know if you and Bob know. Steve Finney has his own parish in Massachusetts, and he just put out a book, and it's called Bullying in the Church. Bullying. And he said, it's from all these people that take these positions that are, think they are higher in authority, and they tell people what to do. And then the lay people start bullying others, and they yell at them for not coming to the church. And this I found with other people. And I found that's extraordinary, that in all religions, I'm not picking on the Christians, I know it's in the Jewish thing, you didn't turn up to church this Sunday, or whatever day it is. How come you weren't here? And they start, going after them, and that makes people want to run away. So I was speaking to a young man, and he said, I went through 3 different teachers, religious teachers, before I found the right institute to go to, where somebody was kind and loving. So that goes to show they're just human beings, and it's a business. So if you find great, great leaders in this, God bless you. I think it's wonderful. And that's why those places are probably filled and others perhaps are closing.
Thank you. Let me follow up with you in terms of the general psychology of discontent, unhappiness, searching on the part of people who may be overly influenced by secularism and materialism. George was very emphatic last week in talking about the quotations concerning the death of God and views of Thoreau and so on. But what I'd like to ask you, Doreen, is whether you think that this, shall we say, negative and depressing spirit is something that will perhaps be somewhat reduced in our lifetimes, or perhaps the lifetimes of our immediate descendants? Or do you think it's going to last longer than that for this kind of negativity to be largely overcome?
Yeah, the discontent, absolutely. I believe it will be in my lifetime, absolutely not. And I'm not sure about my children or grandchildren, but it's got to go on a long time, because you have to uproot all this sickness that's underlying everything. And the more you read, and oh God, there's just too much. I had read an article that came from a bishop in the Vatican, And he said, he is disillusioned. He is really disappointed and very upset because how the church is changing and trying to satisfy the modern way, the modern people, and thinking that changing the liturgy and all, a lot of people have left, so, but he said, he didn't say very favorable things, but that was his opinion. And I read it and I thought it was interesting. He was just, it's a business. In other words, they're looking at it as a business. Is it reaching the people? I'm not sure. Some people, yes. And some places, like I said, if you have a good pastor, wonderful. But honestly, I had my business across the street from Methodist Church. And all the people coming on Sunday after church, and it was very nice. But I heard a lot from the pastors that were traveling pastors because the church elders who hire these people, they were constantly firing them. Now they'd move into an area with their children and their wives, you get settled, the kids now they got to move again. Well, the elders don't like what you're doing or don't like what you're saying. And they could be the nicest people, but it's always somebody, judging someone else. That is not the fruits of the Spirit. That's not how I see religion. So I know a lot of, it's all over the place and I can't judge anything, but I'm just saying it's not going to be quick, not the way I see things today. And it won't be in 10 years from now because they're planning maybe a change in 2030, but I don't know what kind of change they were really talking about, really, whether in our country anyway. And I could see, it's like, what do you call it? The domino effect. It's everywhere. It starts everywhere. So I don't want to prolong all the things that I have read because there was so much information, but it would take a whole program to talk about it. But I think it's interesting just to get a perspective. So there's positive, through adversity, you will find people going. Because I have a good friend in North Carolina and he tells me the churches in his area are filled, but they're filled with the drug addicted, they're filled with alcoholism, they're filled with, all kinds of other things, but still they open the doors to them and they have these meetings. So perhaps with a good pastor or, priest or whatever you call them, yeah, maybe they will turn. If somebody speaks up and talks about light and love and your future existence, but they don't have a future because they don't know there is one. That's the problem. Secularism doesn't talk about you have a future existence. You're building your soul. How are you going to get there? So you have anarchy and you have everything now is coming out, but maybe it has to. Maybe that's what the book talked about. That's how I felt. Because before all this was coming about, I thought, why are they telling us we're going to sail out of the safe harbors? What's going on? Now I could see it. They were really preparing us. And all of us who study this book or study, your own faith as well, my God, you're right there to reach out to these people as much as you can. I got a lot of calls, so I'm lucky. A lot of people have looked for a place they could talk to people. They're so upset. I mean, I try not to be upset after the calls. I have to keep my balance, or else I get, they could take you down as well. But that's how I feel about it. If that's okay, I'm sorry, Neil. It's just the way I feel.
I would like to follow up once again in comparing some of your remarks with some of the remarks that Stephen made last time. He said that from his perspective, the current climate of doubt and uncertainty and so on is actually the sign of a ferment that will eventually lead to positive results. And he did not know how long, whether it's 100 years or 500 years, but that he is confident, to my recollection of what he said, that there will be a positive improvement, that a new synthesis will eventually emerge. Do you agree with that?
Oh, I absolutely agree. You have to pull out the roots of evil before you could replant the good soil. and the good seeds. Of course, I agree. It's just, I don't know either. Stephen is absolutely right.
Thank you. I think we've had a good discussion of this question. I'm looking at the clock and realize that we are essentially at the time to close the webinar today. What I would like to do is simply to read the next question, question Q, and make a few comments about the intent of the question, and we will not really have time to discuss it. But anyway, I'm going to read it. Q, in the second paragraph of the excerpt, Jesus declares, quote, the religion of the Spirit means effort, struggle, conflict, faith, determination, love, loyalty, and progress, unquote. Shall we understand this candor of his as truth in advertising? Or is Jesus implicitly recommending that believers focus on the importance and significance of the final three elements, love, loyalty, and progress, while accepting the practical reality that early steps along the path are likely to include the first three factors, effort, struggle, conflict? In your view, how do the 8 elements of the series relate to each other? Do the middle 2 elements, faith, determination, constitute a catalyst and fulcrum that can and should propel the believer onward? And now, since I've told you that I'm not actually going to recognize any of you to try to give an answer, I will explain that this sentence struck me as being very interesting because it is a realistic mixture of positive elements, especially at the end, with difficult factors at the beginning. And so that in this case, if we return to the question of editing, perhaps this is a more balanced formulation than those that some of us had concerns about in the previous paragraph. So does anyone wish to make any concluding remarks? I emphasize that this is not for the sake of answering that question. Does anyone wish to say goodbye or something similar for a brief time? If not,
I'll just be a pain in the ass and say, this is not really a quotation per se. This is, you put it in quotes as Jesus saying this, but this is really a summary and a restatement of whatever it was he really did say. So it's a little bit misleading, but I'll let you slide this time.
Well, I'm glad that you will put that at my feet, Stephen. I would say that when I remarked that Jesus declares, I'm stating that this is what the Midwear Commission has told us that Jesus declared. And so that's close enough, I think. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. The next webinar will actually be 2 weeks from today, namely on Saturday, the 1st of August. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.